with Karen Kaufman, and then we've got Mary, Garland, and then Kathryn Evans, and Ken and Dan. Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to give the floor to Karen.
Thank you. Radiohead, Pastness, and Alive Events. The sensations of writing loss. After my younger two kids leave for school, I like to sit at the table with a cup of coffee and look out at Arthur's Seat. I've turned Alexa on to shuffle my favorite band, Radiohead. The song How to Disappear Completely comes on. The rain in the air, the slow dance of this ancient volcano, and me sitting by the window becomes something different as it entangles the present with the pastness. It's this idea that the past is always a presence, always here, always affecting. Aaron Manning writes of this pastness, the past in motion with the present, creating new experiences, creating this moment. For whatever reason, I hear the song differently. In this moment, with my coffee, Arthur's Seat, Radiohead, and me, I hear the words, I hear the music, and it connects. I am here. I am not here. I am me sitting at the kitchen table. I am me that has been shocked by news in 2017. I am 45. I am 39. It's an eerie start, the song with its discordant note that won't stop. Mark Fisher writes that the sensation of the eerie occurs either when there is something present, where there should be nothing, or there is nothing present where there should be something. I feel both in this moment, where there are two stories unfolding as I sit here. That there. That's not me. I'm sitting in the James, the Ohio State University's cancer hospital. Things have happened. Things have been said, and I can't wrap my head around it. Earlier that day, we had pastries at our favorite bakery. It was close to the clinic Patrick was set to have a CT scan. He'd been experiencing dizziness, seeing flickers of lights for months. It took 3 doctors' visits for them to decide to probe a bit further. I take a sip of coffee. It's cold in my mouth. The rain picks up. The air is heavy with moisture. Maybe it's just my eyes. I'm not here. This isn't happening. I'm not here. I'm not here. It's Friday. Patrick and I had plans for the day, plans for the weekend. I'd sit in the coffee shop until his appointment's over. Then I'd head to my friend's house for a small chat while he went back to work. It's difficult to see Arthur's Seat with the clouds and the rain. I should close the windows. I should warm my coffee. I do neither. The moment's already passed. Yeah, it's gone. Patrick called me an hour after he went back to work. I was still at my friend's house. I picked up the phone thinking he'd probably left something in the car. The doctor just called me. He said I need to go to the emergency department immediately. They found masses in my brain. I take the last sip of my coffee. The rain has stopped. The darker clouds have given way to the lighter ones. I walk to the kettle, fill it at the sink, and turn it on to heat water again. I stand gazing out the window at the slow time of that now partially obscured ancient volcano, waiting. Throw lights and blown speakers. Why am I in a cancer hospital right now? There are more than 30 lesions in Patrick's brains. They're calling them lesions. What's a lesion? There's a rhythm to making a pot of coffee, a syncopation of sounds, steps, coffee ground, water poured in, timer set, waiting, watching, then pouring. I'm not here. This isn't happening. Patrick is asleep in his hospital bed in his hospital room. It's either very late or very early. I've walked out to a seating area in the hallway. I'm sitting. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to tell our kids. I'm not here. Now, Radiohead's song Daydreaming is on. The lyrics were just happy to serve you. Come on, just as my older son walks in the room asking for something. I lit a candle before writing. The scent is pumpkin pie. Sensations, moments jump into my mind from the sounds, the words, the smells. The ending of daydreaming comes now, half my life, and I connect with the moment. Tom York croons, you know what I mean. And I can't help but think, yes, Tom, I do know what you mean. I actually have no idea what he means. And yet in that moment, I know what he means. Tom's not singing about loss. He's singing his loss. Thoughts are stored in these moments together with music that connects, smells that entangle the pastness, the present, or as Deleuze and Guattari say, the mutual immanence of the lines, and it's not easy to sort them out. Not one of them is transcendent. Each is at work with the others, eminence everywhere. Kathleen Stewart writes about the unsettling ordinariness of difficult moments, how they're always a part of experience. These unexpected disturbances are reality for everyone at some point in life. These ordinary affects catch people up in something that feels like something, and it flickers with resonance here. Little flash up, things flash up, little worlds, bad impulses, alive events with some kind of charge, Stewart tells me. I've been merging time, the past and the present, alive. Life that frays at the edges because of loss, music that connects, brings sensations and affect. I don't write about grief. With Radiohead, Arthur's seat and my coffee, I write my grief. That's it.
That's sad enough.
Thank you so much. Fantastic comment. It's amazing bringing it all into the thing.
Quickly.
Okay. I think like the rest of the presentation, we had some sort of questions and things at the end. Is that all right with everyone? So next up we have Mary Garland. Thank you.
Well, my title is Postqualitative Inquiry in Academia, Animating Potential for Intensities and Anarchiving in Writing. I'm going to deviate from the abstract, and I hope that's okay. It's still related to writing endeavours and practices, and I'll answer any questions about the original one at the end. It's just that as I was writing the paper, particularly that conversation came to mind that I'd quite like to share here. It's about autoethnography, posthumanism, and reverse. Before I read the abstract, though, I'll tell you a bit about the pieces. The thesis was inspired by a 16-year-old I called Chloe. Chloe was one of the first students I taught. She was withdrawn from further education college on her first day. We were both new, both anxious, and so when asked if she was okay, when the computer froze in the middle of the literacy assessment, that she was already frightened and failing, Chloe understandably swore at me and ran out of the classroom. I felt I had to tell my manager. She was stressed, overworked, overtired. Chloe didn't have on before she even registered, and I was devastated. Instead of helping students achieve their potential, I entered one young person the second time. It was not until 10 years later, finally living my dream of being a PhD student, that I learned that what happens in the classroom was not only about Chloe and me. Other human, non-human, and more than human forces were at work. I also learned that to create genuine second chances, the typical neoliberal practices seen in many educational institutions could and must be troubled. With the visit of Santiago's post-qualitative inquiry, writing and research process doesn't just represent what is known, it enables the new. Writing inquires, speculates, and experiments. Excited by writing inquiries, I love exemplifying Jonathan White and Ken Gale's practice of writing to and with the theories and concepts I encountered. And by doing this, more and more writing and more thinking is generated. That's how autoethnography, posthumanism, and Garland came together. I love them so much, I just wrote to and with them. Whilst writing in this way was exciting, there was a time when I seemed to have two pieces on none. I just couldn't see the connections in the always moving writing. Inspired by RMIT's Pastness, which she describes as quote an imminent directionality, felt when the work finds itself. I spread all the writing out and let the text see together how they might connect and what they might do. And suddenly I had a thesis. And now there's also a book which tells the full story of how the thesis was written, which is what this paper is going to be about. How writing, as Ken Gale suggests in his new book, where it has an existence in and of itself. How writing is gifted organisation, refusing the format of the traditional academic thesis. Consequently, the thesis itself challenges traditional orthodox academic practices and writing conventions. There are no chapters. The literature, methodologies, and ethics are implicated in the writing, which readers are asked to read non-linearly, choosing from multiple entry and exit points. I'll finish by reading the extract. Mary is discussing with imaginary fellow Winston student Paula whether or not she's writing an ethnographic inquiry because she's using post-human ways of thinking. Lose consent of the human, and so we can get to conflictable to ethnography. This is the conversation. If you have any thoughts, please share them afterwards. When I next see Paula, she tells me Jonathan White suggests autoethnographies are, quote, a nod to what lies beyond, to what is possible, which is what I'm interested in. She said, Ken and Jonathan suggest asking, is what I am doing likewise a form of inquiry? Or am I simply indulging in the production of accounts that nurture forms of subjectification that serve to sustain search for identity and practice representations of our fragile, unsustainable, and possibly even dishonest? Discussing posthumanism as quote for bringing multiple human, non-human, modern human bodies together on the stage into engagement, they then talk about becoming alert to our mutual interdependence, which really seems to exemplify relationality, all humans, animals, objects, spaces, in relation to each other. In the assessment room of Chloe, we were all mutually interdependent. Chloe, me, the computer, the assessment, the electricity, the other students, everyone and everything within all bodies affected by all our actions. Thinking of the supervisory team as this going well with the supervisory assemblage, thought slow around how this Mary and Ken, they're my supervisors, doctoral college, cats and assemblage is always becoming, how it works in different ways. It's how, with only 5 days before a piece of publishing, it's deciding it's just using the stuff. I didn't get it before. But of course, these multiple assemblages are always on the move. Furthermore, with affect relations being distributed to all bodies, in these movements are moments triggering with potential for change. So there's always a writing into not yet knowing. Each movement leads into another, and another, eventually further into the not yet. All of these connections that explain excitedly, creating these assemblages are relevant to this becoming PhD. To it becoming an autoethnographic inquiry, because auto is not only self within the human body, the individual, me, alone, it includes the surroundings. I'm so conscious that the skin is not a barrier between our body and the things we touch. The things around us. I especially love Bennett, a genetic assemblages. In my letter to the readers, I tried to exemplify her animal, mineral, vegetable, sonority, writing assemblage to offer an insight into the moment of peaceifying. I write a lot about my surroundings too, Qualitative, and about myself. It concerns me that because, as Pat Bike says, writing is never neutral or innocent, they have the power to hurt and betray, particularly about lives, ethical considerations are continually at play. I worry about that too. Care for yourself, since it's based on Tony Adams, Stacey Holman Jones, and Caroline Ellis say personal and professional risks and vulnerabilities can be created in writing about self. What is held here is what Lydia Turner described as my construction of events. Within a constructed ontology, there seems to be factual accounts, which can be identified as the true version of the event. They are just different constructions of an event or moment in history. Rather than it could be dismissed as self-indulgent, only of use to us writing it, but something unfolding could be of use to others. As Tom and James and Ellis say, writing about the self always involves writing about others. Autoethnographies were like something to be created, like a concept. It's the flexibility of autoethnographies that attract me. They're encompassing of creative writing, poetry, emotion and effect, which enables tales to be told in a way which invites readers to share those worlds. Nazim Kathryn writes about literature and concepts being created, and Gale and Wyatt argue autoethnography is both a concept and a practice. And so why shouldn't this PhD be an autoethnographic inquiry and use the emerging concepts? Why not indeed? There are also restrictions in writing autoethnographically and in post-human ways, which I will need to write too. I'm feeling a bit stuck, so I feel as if I belong in St. Pierre's category of indoctrinated students with a methodological background. But I had several years between my MA and my doctoral studies, so I should be okay. I wonder if St. Pierre has any advice. She does actually, it's all in this book, so if you're interested, I have slides.
Did you notice how we were all with you at that? All there. So we've got Kathryn Evans now. Thank you.
Yes, I have got quite a loud voice. Do I do the arrows? Does that? Yeah. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to start with a vision I had whilst questioning why I don't go to my art studio every day. So my friend once told me about a time he killed a crab by lifting back its underbelly flap and piercing it in this nerve center here. But as he lifted back the flap, the crab started freaking out, and I had a vision of it thrashing its arms and legs about in distress. And I had that same vision whilst journaling. And the common theme between this and making artwork is this intense feeling of vulnerability and exposure that can feel like a matter of life or death. So I had the sense that if I went to the studio every day, it was like going downstairs, step by step, getting closer to this intense vulnerability. And if I was consistent, I would inevitably reach it, which scared me. And it's not an unfounded fear. So in her study, she interviewed artists about block, And one artist was so triggered by the content of his artwork that it induced auditory hallucination, which just goes to show this like close relationship between the art and the psyche. So two central ideas that came out of my research was finding that I have two selves and the concept of non-abusive practice, which is basically not forcing myself to do anything I don't want to do, and working on my internal dialogue to be encouraging and curious rather than an abusive critic that I'd carry around with me. So the concept of the two selves came out of me taking my artwork to therapy. So I started by showing her my Instagram work, which is very public facing, and then I showed her my sketchbook. And as she opened my sketchbook, she said, these look like they were made by a completely different person. And that really resonated with me because they did feel like they were made by very different parts of myself. So the sketchbook stuff was made purely on instinct and following visions, and my Instagram work was more like rigidly planned and perfectionist. So I've called these two selves the inner guiding self and the outer critical self. And I think of them as being two distinct but overlapping systems within my psyche. With the body relating to the inner self and the thinking mind relating to the outer self. But I think of the unconscious as being inextricably connected with my body. So I find that my body feels like the more authentic part of myself. It shows me how I really feel, and its impulses direct me towards actions that will make me happy and away from actions that won't. And it feels almost spiritual, how it seems to know exactly what I need. And I think of this sort of guidance as coming from a kind of unconscious portal within my body where creative ideas and solutions seem to spring from. So this is how my inner self communicates with the rest of me. So visions have been really crucial in making artwork from my inner self, and also in giving me like a deeper symbolic understanding as I've been audio journaling as part of this research. And the breath has also been really important with journaling, because I know that I'd hit upon something really important when I'd let out a long sigh. So my outer self is in charge of my internal dialogue, which has a tendency to run away with itself and draw awareness away from my body. So it's very critical about my artwork, about the style, the subject matter, whether it was my calling or I was completely deluded, like it couldn't make up its mind, but it was very anxious and very vocal about it. And I think this anxiety is connected to a survival instinct to not be rejected by the group, where we're more vulnerable to predators. So it's always on the lookout for the rules of the group to make sure that we get to stay a part of it. So I think that explains this like life or death feeling that can come from block, because we're ultimately trying to do something original when we're being creative. So there's no precedent set to reassure ourselves that it will be accepted. And this is where problems have emerged for me, as the rules that I've internalized about how I should behave, particularly as a woman, to like not stand out and to not think too much of myself, were often at odds with what my inner self like wanted to do. So then this kind of internal battle started where my outer self would do whatever it could by like carrot or stick to ensure that my inner self was not heard. So the key has been integrating the two selves and getting them on the same team, because ultimately creativity is about passing an idea back and forth between the unconscious and the conscious, the inner and outer self. But I found that the real magic happens when I let my inner self lead the team. So now, as a result of this research, I try to just unquestioningly do whatever it tells me to, however scary that might be. But that's been a real savior, even though it tends to only reveal an action one stage at a time. So I don't actually know what I'm letting myself in for at the start. I just have to trust it and like keep going. So I've identified different types of creative block, depending on which part of myself is blocked. And that's been really key to understanding it. So the first type, inner block, is when my inner self has an inclination to make artwork and my outer self is scared or sometimes feigns disinterest. and tells me to do something less risky, like binge watch a TV series, or in this example that I used to use a lot, like getting drunk is a great way of avoiding your inner self. And then outer block is where my outer self suggests a very like safe and acceptable creative project. So it might be very academic or very impressive, but my inner self has got no interest in it. So there's it's not exciting, there's no active exploration or discovery. And this one feels like a heavy sensation of dread, whereas an inner block to me is more sparky as I try to like run away from it. So that's one way that I can tell them apart, but sometimes one can masquerade as another. So I also came to think about art as relationship and notice similarities between how I approached art and how I approached romantic relationships, both reflecting my anxious attachment type and a fear of rejection. And I had a really important realization around this when I was journaling about procrastinating, and I got a vision of me sliding sideways along a bench, which was from a recent second date that I'd been on, where I wanted to like eke back into an intimate connection where like coming in head on would have felt too direct. So I really learned from that procrastination's like a really important part of my creative process, because it allows me to ease into the vulnerability that I'm going to ask of myself and to slowly come into my body. And I find sex is a really good analogy for this. So where you wouldn't like go on a date and demand sex on arrival, after a period of time, or you might, but it might not be advised. But after a period of time of getting to know each other, like looking into each other's eyes, laughing at each other's jokes, and then very like gentle physical contact starts happening. After a time, you're like crying out for this level of intimacy and vulnerability that just earlier would have felt horribly abrupt. And I think the same is true of making artwork, that I've realized I have to romance myself and sort of allow creativity to emerge at its own pace. So my take-home messages in how to overcome block have been to be kind to myself, expand awareness to my body, and to come in sideways.
Thank you very much. Our last presentation here is Dan and Ken. Thank you very much.
Yeah, wearing a mountain uniform. Yeah,
Yours is a bit more medical. Hi, everyone. I'll read the title of our paper. It's Artefacts, Anarchiving, and Autoethnography. Speculative writing is autoethnography, using Lauren Ballant and Kathryn Stewart's hundreds. It's an experiment. Just briefly, Dan and I did a presentation last year at the ICAE conference down the hill, and we had an experience, didn't we? We had a kind of epiphany. So we're going to write from that. Lauren Ballant and Kathryn Stewart's method is to, in the book, it's called the hundreds, yeah? They write 100, and they write 100, they write 100. So we had millions of words, because we've been corresponding for the last year. So we thought, oh, what do we do about this? So we appropriated Ballant and Stewart's method, yeah?
we have.
Yeah, so we go?
Yeah, take it away, Ken.
Was it me, is it? Right.
You first.
Right, okay. In writing with curiosity and excitement into the concept of the anarchive, with the words of Whitehead echoing around her, Erin Manning asks how to reconcile the freshness of processes underway with the weight of experience captured, how to reconcile force and form, how to catch that which resisted the archive.
I was worried about the bird babies. They were sheltering in a bare, unshaded, stark cement, glass, and tile balcony. Separated from us by glass, occasionally they would look into the room, the gathered humans, as if to say, what's going on in here?
Your words pulled the audience in, animating an energetic pulse amongst those gathered in the room. Creative energy, agencement, force frictionalizing with form, words demanding attention, thinking, moving with the pacing of the words, the eventfulness of wording, words in swim, informing, potent in their move toward enunciation. In the delicate frisson of this movement of words, there is always the infra-thin, the moment of warmth and sensuality, lingering, left behind.
I was worried they might fall. As they sometimes hopped up onto the railing, I said, could they fly yet? Their mother came and went. I tried to forget them. Trust nature. We've done so much well-intentioned damage, we humans, and our quest to manage nature. Nature knows itself what it means.
And then a startling, new words break into the flow. Ah, look, Mum's back. The flow, the flow briefly recedes and then eventually reconnects. Dan's eyes lead us to the balcony, through the glass, outside the conference room. The gull has returned to the nest with food to feed her 3 chicks. Briefly, we are drawn. Momentarily, we are with the tense, fleeting necessities of nature. The unfolding of a moment with nature nurtures a folding in with the vibrant creativity of Dan's presentation. Always prehensively attending to the brief enactment of these movements, we are activated by the potency that fuels the capaciousness of these moments. The gull feeds her chicks. Dan returns to their script. Senses in the room turn back to them. The heat simmers on.
Throughout the day, I try to ignore them. They're pretty compelling. A theater of nature in the midst of this city. Conference attendees are attuned to them in varying ways. Some photos are taken, some comments are made. The day grows hotter. Eventually, I sneak a bowl of water out to them, moving slowly. They withdraw to the other side of the balcony. Over a couple of hours, they slowly approach, hesitate, and then eventually drink. Then eventually bathe. One of the chicks just waddles in and stands in the water. Their performance complements the affective narratives wafting through the interior air, the creative relational autoethnographics, zipping and zapping our understandings of what it means to be human in relation with the other than you. Oh, my friend Trish did ask me, do birds get lonely? I think about the chicks waiting for their mom between deliveries of French fries. Were they scared she wouldn't return? Were they hot like the rest of Britain? Did they reflect on their predicaments? Did they anticipate the future? Did they consider doing an autoethnography of food and global warming? Research methods as anarchic socio-relational activityism and research reflection, knowledge production as deep attention to the experience of being alive doesn't seem to figure into their one-leg optics.
Manning asks, how else beyond the archive might we activate current traces to future eventing? Always thought in the act, I always feel caught by the slowness of the writing on the page. As my writing unfolds, it seems to do so in a multiplicity of now you see me, now you don't moments. I sense that writing moves at a pace that is always a few steps behind the eventfulness of the incessance of worlding. I have to trust that it here it's Karen. Yeah,
Here so well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How Karen narrated her
Mhm.
piece.
Ah,
Yeah, of the Radiohead song.
Yes.
How you play with a piece of recording, which I assume is an original recording. It wasn't recorded for this purpose, right?
Well, I mean, that's a song that's been recorded by Radiohead, but
Sure.
I had help to get it to do what it did.
Right, okay.
Yes.
It's still incredible.
It was good, wasn't it? Really?
Yeah.
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 I have to thank my partner, Andrew. But I wanted it to play with the idea that I'm thinking with the song, right? I'm writing, I'm thinking, it was a part of it.
That's exactly what came across for me. Yeah, because you can say it's difficult to put across for the reader or the audience member unless they partake in an aspect of the experience. Because you can write in the paper, this is what I was listening to and writing about.
Right.
And even if you know the song, the best of circumstances, it still fails so much in the. Thank you for putting that.
Thank you very much. I wasn't in person on 20 last year.
Okay.
Gosh, it's like, wasn't that?
Yeah, well, it's hard.
Yeah.
I can hear what you're saying with words and the feeling extremely.
Yeah, it was impressive.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thanks to everyone. It was a really great panel and there's so many interesting process. And also, Mary, I just want to say that I felt Ken's visible exhale when you were talking about being 5 days in submission. Kathryn, I was just wondering, I was really struck by the kind of public Instagram artwork example and your journal example. And I wanted with that beautiful discussion of rock and the kind of voices that are playing around. With these realizations and those kind of 3 recommendations to yourself, what's the artwork looking like? I mean, is there kind? I wondered if there was a kind of Venn overlap there.
Yeah, it's in progress, the change now, because I think it is shifting. And I did kind of want to be able to bring a painting with me today that I did alongside the research, but it's not finished. But yeah, so what I'm trying to do is to bring like my sketchbook work onto the canvas. Like that was like straight away the first thing I did, which instantly felt right to do. I had a bodily sensation of relief, like when I put the canvas on the easel. But where the jury's kind of out at the moment is because I was trying to like integrate the 2 ways of working, and like portraiture is quite like heavily connected to my like must do something impressive, like everyone's impressed by a portrait kind of thing. And I don't know whether that's going to get to stay or not at the moment, because I'm still trying to work around whether it's only there because I need to do it to be validated, like by others saying like, well, that's impressive. But I do enjoy it once I start doing it, but I've noticed that's actually when the painting stalled that I'm making now, when I got to the portrait aspect of it, because I thought that I'd better do the face soon before it gets too crazy and I don't know where to put it. So I was like, I'm going to put it on, but then it's felt like, oh, it's hard to touch it now. Like it's sort of created this, like I can make it can go wrong in a way that like my sketchbook stuff can't go wrong. It's all part of this journey and process. But so I don't know, it might get elbowed out completely, or I'm trying to find a way of doing it where I'm not rigidly sticking to an actual person's face, like it being more imaginative or something. But yeah, I really want the time to explore it and to like really like get into that process. So I don't know where I can find that time, but that's the
I'm sorry, I'm always obsessed about mentioning, but it made me think of Linda Barry's work, you know, that beautiful called What It Is, and she talks about the kind of critical self and her art making and common beautiful connections to autoethnography as well. Yeah. Yeah.
Mine was just a fact, definitely that description of the inner and outer rocks, because I recognise them both, and I love the fact that you said that they masquerade with each other as well, so trying to recognise which one is to say.
Yeah, and that I think also the coming in sideways thing is I find important for that, because the emotions that I can feel for it change when I'm in front of it. So I can think that it's one, and that's why I'm not sure about the portrait thing. I can feel like, oh no, I'm just not interested. It's like, it's my outer self wanting to do it. And then when I like creep in and I'm faced with it, then suddenly it's like sucks me into it again. So I think like, yeah, just coming in and seeing what changes is like helpful. So, I might find that sideways. Yeah, sideways, the best way.
Thank you all. It's really, I loved it. I was really struck by Mary's point about multiple entry and exit points. And it made me think about, you know, as creators, as writers, as artists, how we have very multiple entry and exit points, and what do we do with the millions of words, or the conflicting thoughts and feelings, or the different images and stuff. And I wondered if any of you would want to comment more on your own entry and exit points as creators.
One of the things we found with Manning's concept of the anarchive is that it's just a series of affective forces, and the question becomes, how do you form it? Maybe a bit like yours, what Karen, you've got the sketchbook and you've got multiple sketches, so how do you form those forces? So various people have tried different methods of Deleuze and Guattari, for example, use plateaus, where you can pop in from any plateau, so you don't have to begin at the beginning and linearly read it all the way through to the conclusion, but that also gives multiple exit points as well. But I think Ben and I found that we had so much stuff, and we knew we only had 8 minutes, so we appropriated Lauren Lamp and Kathryn Stewart's thing and just cut and paste it. And many people before, Brian Easton, William Burroughs, David Bowie have done the same kind of thing, and I suppose in a sense ours didn't have a linear narrative. There are 4 points where you could come into it. When we expand it into a paper, which will go into some prestigious journal.
Very prestigious. I think those are interesting questions for autoethnography as well, right? Like that idea that an autoethnography has to be a single person or a voice. A lot of the work that we're exposed to in the global South, Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand, is a lot of non-white, non-Western approaches to autoethnography in terms of collective conceptions of what, still using those terms, not rejecting those terms, but not needing for them to be humanistic or individualistic Stacey, I've been reading Deborah Levy's books recently, and forget who she quotes, but she talked about she quotes a writer who says, if you want to make a happier story, just finish earlier or finish later, right? So I think those are, however any of us would answer the question, they're interesting considerations for autoethnography. And the work and the particular work that autoethnography can do in the academy, I spent a lot of time talking and thinking about this with colleagues like Ken, and is the power of an autoethnography, how affective it can be, how much it makes people cry, or is that the sign of its impact? What if it's horror, like we heard earlier today? What if it's laughter, or what if, what if, is it a successful autoethnography if you don't feel anything when you finish hearing or reading it? I think autoethnography can do much, much more. But it's part of its call to fame, right? It's part of its power is to bring the affective back in.
I think as autoethnographers and people are doing that kind of writing, there is that energy between force and form. You know, there is that imbrication between content and style. They're not separate. Yeah, you don't write it and then think, oh, how shall I stylistically put that? There is this. And I think it's important, you know, we want to think about ways of people accessing the work in multiple ways and also exiting as well. So it's a really important thing to think about style as well as content. Yeah.
Thank you.
Can you
Shall I read it?
Yes, please. To Kathryn, not a question, but just a thought. Seeing both your Instagram art and personal art made me think about when the visual elements of art is highly recognizable as something. It feels like there's a greater pressure to make it look good. But with more personal art, where you're working with more abstract concepts, there is less of that pressure because the concept itself doesn't have an immediately recognizable form. And both these art forms seem like visual representations of the inner guiding self and the outer critical self. Great comment.
There's a bit more.
But this concept of the inner guiding self and outer critical self is something I'd like to go forward and consider. Yeah, I think that's really, I think it's definitely something with whether it can be considered right or wrong. If something's going to look like something, you've got an easy benchmark to have failed. You know, but if you're just making it up, then it's interesting actually, because it's sort of harder in a way to make that imaginative work kind of speak, I think, because it can easily look like a mess.
Yeah.
So it's sort of it's less of a challenge, even though it's technically more challenging to like do the like portrait stuff. But I think it, like, they do totally represent the two selves as well, like, for sure. And there's like, I was really struck when I first started researching this. I looked at all the artwork that I've made to date and looked at all these like the paintings that were on canvases and stuff, how rigid they were, as if there's a rule system there. They're like really planned and like quite stark and unemotional, I felt. So they really did feel like, yeah, representations of those two selves. And that's where I really wanted to like find a way of trying to integrate them, because that's what, like what I'm trying to do as a practitioner, to try and do that on the canvas as well. But like, I don't know whether that's like making a deal with myself to keep the outer self going. It just like won't leave. But yeah, nice to meet you.
Yeah, fine.
Which is one of the things you now and again, was your presentation, the way it was presented, the warmth between you. There was something about maybe it was one to be part of that. Well, what I was thinking is, because that was part of the evocative nature of the way it's being presented. And I was thinking, because of the conversation that we had upstairs before, what is getting lost when publishing a piece of work, where this will not be parts of what will be read from the paper. I don't have anything more profound to add to that.
It's really profound. I mean, it relates to Gale's question also. You know, and it is the play between force and form, because the creative force of sketchbooking and journaling creates huge amounts of wonderful stuff. But then you've got to form it into, you know, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, or an 80,000 word dissertation or whatever. You know, and often things can get lost. You know. We've left thousands of pages on the cutting room floor.
Right, like birds. But I mean, people are taking it forward further, right? And doing podcasts and retaining some of the sound and visual and other kinds of, atmosphere.
You sure?
Yeah, I think it might be worth considering alternative ways of publishing. Autoethnography book.
But that's a disciplinary issue. I completely agree with you. But it's so profound. It's something that deeply affects some of the teachers, and students particularly, because we're talking with we have a different reason. But in psychology, I mean, I think we have to go into what to do because the show publication practices in this school like are changed. Like the people that are making editors predominantly do it for career reasons. The people that review papers in psychology don't have the time to review them. They give irrational feedback. So I think each of us, if we want to bring that change, we need to go back to our disciplines and push with literally a lot of attitude and come out what it is that we're seeing. And of course, be open to a conversation. My experience of pushing this was that there is no platform for a conversation. It is a discipline that has long been critiqued for the emperor's with clothes, for clothing behind pseudoscientific discourse. And there's a point where you can have these arguments, and there comes a point where you're like, you know what, bitches? No. You can't take that game.
I'm done.
I'm done.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that should be everybody's way at all. I'm saying it is an encouragement if you do want to see the dissemination of this type of social work, and to also protect it from being swallowed by consumerism and neoliberalism and all the the forces of corrupted psychological knowledge. We can go back to our local context and be the change we want to see. We can't anticipate quite what that might look like for our own topics or countries or institutions.
And also coming along to conferences like this. Yeah, we've had already today, we've had some amazing presentations, just thinking what Karen's done, for example, of bringing across maybe a complex concept in a very different kind of way to make it work, I think it's really important. Yeah.
And working transdisciplinarily as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Push it a little bit. Well, it is being done over here. It's not, you might think it's still not legitimate, but it is being done over here. So if you do something that maybe straddles psychology and education, or
I think just to respond specifically, I came to the project in the last 5 years. And for me, it rescued me seriously. It was life-saving, not just like something I enjoyed. For finding me, it was beyond that. I think the time for no, it's legitimate. Look at it here. For me, it's done. I'm like, if somebody says this is not legitimate, I'm like, who the fuck are you?
So how do you?
How the conversation?
What
do you mean by that?
But how do you navigate that for young scholars or PhD students here? If they're in psychology and they don't feel that they're in a position to say fuck you, like I guess what I'm pointing to are some strategies. So that is a choice, which also becomes an easier choice perhaps once you're further up the chain.
But I can share my experience that when we tell people that criticize them, tell me your argument. There is no argument.
No, of course not. And there are many in this room who say the time for justification is past. And that's true, but at the same time, like I know, in Australia, Stacey and I have people come to us constantly who go, my supervisor won't let me use this. Okay, what does that mean? Well, it means you have to get a new supervisor, or you're not gonna sit there and argue with a professor. It depends on how much you want to work with that person, how much you're committed to working with autoethnography. Maybe it's getting another supervisor. Maybe you have to leave that institution. You don't want to work with that supervisor. So it can be precarious. People are in precarious situations. I love you, Spirit, but I'm just saying we're not all able in positions.
And I think that outside of academia, a lot of people don't even know what it is. I tell people that I'm doing it. I work in the NHS in mental health, and loads of the people in the psychology department didn't know what it was, and I had to explain it. So it's not, I don't think it's as far reaching, the accepting that it is legitimate research has got as far as it needs to.
But don't forget that there are people who have spent 20, 30 years making the legitimacy argument, so you have places to go, you have resources to share. And this is just part of probably all of the autoethnography communities, certainly that I've gone to. Everyone's now deputized to share what you know about autoethnography and get resources in people's hands and make that argument.
to buy the t-shirt.
I've been handed one for it.
Seems like it.
Any more questions? Thank you very much.
Yeah.